So what we're trying to accomplish, as David described, is full spectrum sustainability, meaning that we're trying to simultaneously and in a coordinated way transform economic systems, physical systems, and social systems. And I agree with Karen, as she pointed out this morning, that we're behind on the social systems part. We don't routinely collect that data, and we haven't thought as much about how to create the transformations and to document those transformations. So tonight in this panel, the three of us are going to focus on the social systems piece of it. I'm going to lay out some of the theoretical approach that's guiding the kinds of strategies that we're adopting. Then John is going to give you some examples of some of those strategies. And finally, Anders is going to talk about the fact that we can't move the economic system until we move the social system. And I confess that I have a ulterior motive. Alongside of the Oberlin Project, John and I are also spearheading a very ambitious research program to make sure that we learn as much as we can from this experiment that we're doing. So we want to be able to evaluate and document the success or failure of the transformations that we're trying to achieve, and also to be able to say something to the wider community about what are the strategies that worked and what are the strategies that didn't. We're a little daunted by it. And so one of the things that we hope to get out of the next couple of days is to have you all thinking about what are the crucial variables that we need to be measuring and tracking? What are the crucial questions that we need to be asking to capture and evaluate the kind of social transformations that we're trying to evaluate? Because nobody's asking people's opinions routinely. We're tracking money, we're tracking carbon, we're tracking electricity, we're tracking water. We're not tracking what's going on in people's minds and in their social systems. So we've got to start doing that, and we want you to help us. Okay. So David paints a really beautiful picture, and then he flies off to San Diego and leaves us to try to figure out how to accomplish what he's decided that we ought to be doing. And he's right, we ought to be doing it, but how are we going to do it? And obviously, we're going to use every tool that we have at our disposal. We will be using economic incentives. We will be using policy. John will talk about how we're using technology. And of course, we know about all the great behavioral strategies that have come out of psychology and behavioral economics. So yes, we're going to do all that. And of course, we should be doing all that. But to refer back to David's slide about Donella Meadows, those are not actually the best leverage points to be making change. And one of the best ways to create change is to create a fundamental shift in the way people are looking at things and a fundamental shift in the way they are relating to their world. And so that's what we want to do. We want to change people, not just from the outside working in, but change them from the inside working out. And that's been the focus of my work for the last 10 years, is trying to understand the psychological relationship that people have with the natural world and exploring to the extent to which that shapes the way that they respond to the kinds of challenges that we're facing right now. Okay, so I want to point out that people are weird and they do many, many crazy things. And this is actually good news for us, as you'll see in a moment. So many of you may remember that there was a time and place in this world when parents would get up at 2 in the morning and wait outside department stores so that they could bring home one of these rather ugly dolls to their daughter. And they were charged an exorbitant amount of money. And then the Beanie Babies came along, and there's something else after that, I'm sure. The point is that you don't have to look very far to find many examples of people suffering, doing crazy things, doing inconvenient things, doing deadly things in the name of someone or some group or some cause that they love. How can we harness that power? How can we harness that motivation and channel it not into painting your body blue, but into working for the changes that we need to create a sustainable world? My answer to this question is very much grounded in my discipline of social psychology. And in social psychology, there's growing consensus that there's really a relatively small set of what we call core social motives that drive our behavior as strongly as our core biological motives. So just as strongly as we need to drink water and we need to feed ourselves, just as strongly as that, we are driven to engage in social interaction with other human beings. We are obligatorily social creatures. We cannot survive without other people. And so the argument is that as we were evolving, it was those people who felt those urges to fit in with their group that were the ones that survived, and those that didn't got ostracized and didn't make it. So the overarching fundamental core motive that drives so much of human behavior is the need to belong. When you look at people who have suffered long-term isolation, people in maximum security prisons, for example, who are alone for 23 hours of the day out of 24, they suffer physical and psychological damage that is long-lasting and very comparable to the damage suffered by people who are physically tortured. When we are ostracized, the part of the brain that processes physical pain lights up. So we are wired to need other people and to experience exclusion from other people as a very, very negative and aversive state. And we are motivated to engage in behaviors that will preserve our belonging. So in the service of that overarching motive, we have some cognitive needs. We need to feel like the world makes sense, that we understand what's going on. We need to feel like we can have some kind of impact on it. And we have emotional needs. We need to feel like we are basically worthy, and we need to feel like we can basically trust the people around us. So we have to feel good about ourselves, good about others. Okay? These behaviors drive all of our surface behavior. And if you think of an example of someone who's really worked up and upset about something, or some argument that's happened, or some fight, or a war, I promise you that you can trace it back to one or more of these core social motives. It's not that they're fighting about the committee report. It's not that they're fighting about the passage of the law or where you're going to draw the boundary line. They're fighting about one of these core things. So if we are to create a sustainable future, a sustainable community, not only do we have to create a community where people can easily and satisfactorily meet those core social needs as well as their physical needs, we ought to be leveraging the power of those motives. We ought to be channeling it and using the power of those motives to create the kind of change that we need to do. This is the leverage point. This is the leverage point that Donella Meadows is talking about. If you change this, if you harness this kind of power, then you don't have to worry about rebates and coupons for compact fluorescent bulbs. In my research, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the way that people psychologically relate to the natural world, and much of that research has focused on the concept of connectedness to nature. This is in collaboration with my colleague Steve Mayer at Oberlin College. Aldo Leopold argued that if we felt like we belonged to the land, we would feel an obligation to protect it. And we think he's right. So this concept of connection to nature is very much it's a self-concept. It's how you see yourself in relationship to the world around you, and it involves not just interconnectedness, but also a sense of egalitarianism. So, yeah, we know we need water and we need soil to grow our food, but it's not that we're just on top taking. We're a part of it. We're egalitarian members of this larger community. And what I want to argue is that connectedness to nature can inspire helping behavior, can inspire protective behavior that would be compatible with our sustainability goals, and that it can help fulfill these very core social motives, and in particular the core social motive to belong. And that's really good news, because if we can align our sustainability efforts with these very fundamental psychological needs, then we don't have to push people along. They're going to be running in that direction. So when I talk about this stuff with a mainstream psychology audience, I actually have to spend about 15 minutes convincing them that people can have a psychological relationship with the natural world, and they're very skeptical about that. If you have doubts about that, we can talk about it later. I decided to skip over that for tonight, thinking you were a slightly more sympathetic audience. But I do want to say a little bit about how that connection might operate, because in part it relates to some of the things that John is going to be talking about. So we are so obligatorily social that we tend to overuse our systems of thought that help us understand the social world. So we have these social cognition systems, and we will use them to explain all kinds of things. So is there anyone in the room who hasn't, for example, said that their computer or the photocopier or the car is out to get them, or they could tell you were in a hurry, so that's why the photocopier jammed, or we make these statements all of the time, right? And on one level we don't mean them, but there's another level that we do, right? And this is especially true for animate objects, things that move. So MRI research shows that when we look at something that's moving, all of the social cognition systems of the brain light up. They're alert, they're ready, they're waiting to process social information. So what we're arguing is that if we can activate these social systems, and there's every reason to believe that nature does that, right? Because nature is incredibly animated, and we know from lots of cultures all over the world that we're very prone to anthropomorphizing the natural world. We do that quite readily. So if we can activate those social systems and apply them and have them be relevant to our interactions with the natural world, then we have triggered all of the ethical and social systems that guide our interactions with each other, and we've applied them to the natural world. So how do we harness this power? Well, first, I am not going to go into the details because there just isn't time, but we've conducted a lot of research over the last 10 years backing up Aldo Leopold's assertion that we protect things that we feel are a part of us. And we know that with human-to-human relationships. The data there is incredibly clear, that the closer you feel to someone, a person, the more willing you are to help them or sacrifice for them, et cetera. It's true for the natural world as well. So we've collected a lot of data from both community samples and college samples on all kinds of pro-environmental behaviors, and we find that those behaviors consistently relate to the sense to which people feel connected to the natural world. We've done a laboratory study now where we have demonstrated that people who are connected to nature are more willing to walk an extra distance to recycle a piece of paper that they've been told to get rid of than those who are not. And I think sort of the thing that excites me the most is we've demonstrated this with really important behaviors like how much electricity people use. And we've done this in dormitories, and now in 4 different samples, and one of those is a sample that includes dormitories from 40 different colleges around the country, we find that the single best psychological predictor of electricity use in dorms is the average level of connectedness to nature in those dorms, which surprised me. I was expecting it to be perceptions of norms or attitudes or something like that, but those never come out. It's always this sense of being part of the natural community. Okay. So that's great. Connectedness to nature, if we feel like we're a part of something, we will work to protect it. And that's good news, and we can use that information. But the news gets even better, because it's not just that this is going to be something that's good for our natural world. This is really, really good for us. Again, with lots of questionnaire data from community samples and from college samples, we consistently find correlations between feeling connected to the natural world and all kinds of positive outcomes. So positive mood, feeling actually more connected to other people is related to connectedness to nature. It's associated with life satisfaction. It's associated with fulfillment. And we have also looked to try to explain, is this partly why being in nature is so beneficial? There's lots of research showing that if you spend time in the natural world, there are all these benefits. There's health benefits, psychological benefits, et cetera. And we've done several studies that suggest that a big part of why it's so healing to be in the natural world is that you are connecting to something bigger than yourself. So let me just quickly describe 2 studies in a little bit more detail that help to support this idea that we can meet these fundamental core motives through connecting to the natural world. In this study, we had people describe 4 different experiences, 2 social and 2 nature experiences, 2 positive and 2 negative. And for each one, we asked them the extent to which they felt trusting, they felt in control, that they understood what was going on. And we also, of course, asked about the need to belong. So can people meet these core social motives that we think of as being only about people in the natural world? And I've only got here the data from the positive experiences. The data from the negative experiences was actually exactly the same. Notice that there's not really a lot going on here, and that's actually exactly the point. So across the bottom there, we have all 5 of the core social motives, with belonging being on your far right. And basically, people are reporting relatively high levels of getting these needs met. The important thing to notice here is that the gray bars and the green bars are exactly identical, meaning there is no difference in how much belonging you feel when you're with a group of people than when you're when you're in the natural world. This is really important. If we want to motivate people to protect the natural environment, we want them to be getting something out of it too, right? It can't all be about self-sacrifice. And in fact, nature gives to us as much as we could potentially give to it. Final study, psychologists like to ostracize people because they do really interesting things after they've been ostracized. And in this study, we had the hypothesis that if you had access to the natural world after being ostracized, you would actually recover better. You would be less damaged, less bummed out by the ostracism experience if you had access to the natural world. So in this study, we had people relive an ostracism. We didn't actually ostracize anybody. We had people relive a negative experience, either an ostracism experience or a failure. And they did that either inside, which is the standard way psychological research is conducted, or outside in a beautiful wooded setting. And we looked at people's mood, and we also looked at their level of connection to the natural world. And the important point here is that being in nature does make people feel more connected to the natural world, which we would expect. But we also predicted that it would be especially those people who had been ostracized, who had a need to establish a sense of connection, would use nature to do so. And that's what we find, that those who are ostracized and outdoors reported higher levels of connection to the natural world. And we also found that they had lower levels of negative affect. So this whole experience was just not as negative for them as it was for everybody else. Okay? Most importantly for us, for stats wonks, this is a mediation analysis. For those who don't really like stats, the take-home message is that it was the extent to which people were connected to the natural world directly related to the extent to which that they didn't feel as negative. Okay, so it was those who felt most connected who also felt least negative. So the take-home points that I have for you all are that we do act to protect what we feel connected to, what we feel a part of. We will do inconvenient things. We will do difficult things. We will sacrifice for something that we feel a part of. And we have every reason to believe that this applies to the natural world as well as anything else. And then finally, humans benefit from this relationship. This is good for us. This does not have to be a hard sell. This is a positive thing. How do we promote connectedness to nature? Really, really briefly, we do have data suggesting that environmental education is a really, really important component of that, especially for children. Even as little as 15 minutes of exposure to a natural environment can have a really detectable psychological effect on people. And we in Oberlin have particularly been looking at how can we connect people back to the natural world using feedback technologies. And with that, I will turn it over to John to let him describe some of the things we're trying there.